My name's Jackie. I go by agaperste on chain. So before I got into crypto, I was doing technology on the TradFi side. And then I got snatched into the crypto data land, where I worked for 3 years looking at on-chain data. And then I wanted to go a little bit deeper into a vertical, which is where I went to Uniswap Foundation to lead the data side of things. And now I am leading the issuance data for Bridge. So if you don't know about Bridge, Bridge is a stablecoin infrastructure company where we work on money movement, on-chain, off-chain ramping. We work on issuing stablecoins, and we also have stablecoin-backed cards. Okay, so you probably are feeling this already. Today, we live in a proliferation age of stablecoin markets. So there's over $315 billion of total supply on chain, according to DeFi Llama. And then we have more than 300 stablecoins deployed across almost 50 chains. That's almost 1,000 deployments on chain. So that's a lot, right? And out of those, since 2023, the USD stables in particular has tripled, more than tripled actually, from 60 to 203 stablecoins. And all these stablecoins are also growing. There's more than 10 of them that are already exceeding $1 billion supply. That is a lot, if you count like in seconds, right? I think like 1 billion is like maybe like 30 year old or something like that. It's a lot to get 1 billion. Oh, this might be the part. I have a YouTube video that's supposedly showing a dynamic graph of all the stables that's reached 1 billion, of how fast, just they're reaching 1 billion. So the point of this YouTube video is supposed to show that the speed that these stablecoins are reaching $1 billion supply is accelerating. So here I've listed a few examples. We've got RLUSD in 300-something days, and then you fast forward to 100-something days, 44 days for USDS, and then finally we have 35 days for USD1. So very, very short amount of time. Oh, okay, that's that YouTube video. Okay, so we have multiple stablecoins, right? We have like over 300 stablecoins. We have many, many chains, like 50 chains. And then you also have different like bridge variants. There's like native mint, and there's like CCTP, and there's like layer 0, and then before there's like Axelar. So you would actually expect what? Liquidity chaos, right? You would like think that probably liquidity fragmentation is the biggest hindrance in terms of adoption. But not actually if you look at the on-chain data. Okay, so if you look at the, I just sampled a few stablecoins, obviously the top 1 and 2, USDC, USDT, and then the number 5 through 20, I've got USDS and USDE, and then Cash just as like more of a younger stablecoin from like beyond a 20 rank. So if you look at all of them, the supply per token is incredibly concentrated on like 1 to 2 chains. So we're very familiar with USDT, right? It's basically Tron and Ethereum dominated. More than 90% of the supply is on these 2 chains. USDS, it's like 77%, like a lot of it on Ethereum, a lot of it is on Solana. And then we've got USDS with more than 94% on Ethereum. Yada, yada, yada. And then with Cash itself, it's only live on Solana. So like 100% of it is on Solana. So basically, there isn't really like a fragmentation in terms of chains per stable. And then I mentioned about like the bridge variants, right? And if you look at it, the number of bridge variants, for example, like I looked at it, I was like, oh, like optimism, back in my days, it was bad. There's like 6 variations of the bridge tokens. Like it must be bad. And I was really surprised to find that the number of bridge variants doesn't equal to fragmented liquidity. So the liquidity in terms of like the bridge, like per chain, how many variants there are like incredibly concentrated. So here I sampled for USDC and USDT. And the width of the bar is basically how much supply of that token per chain. So here we can see like Ethereum Solana for USDC, and then Tron and Ethereum for USDT. And then within each bar, you can see the supply composition of each of the bridged variants. So like based on color, you can already kind of see that it's pretty, I guess, uniform. It's like most chains just have 1 bridged variant. With, I think, Polygon, there's like a bit of a split, well, not 50-50, but like 58-42 split. And then Polygon, it's like 60-40 split. So bridge variance is also not an issue. But if we think back to in the beginning, right, we talked about there's a proliferation of the number of tokens. We still largely live in this world of a duopolistic world of like USDC and USDT. So if liquidity fragmentation isn't the hindrance to success, what is so hard about making a stablecoin, right? Like what is standing between you clicking, okay, I'm gonna mint a token, to, oh my God, my token has made it. So here are, I guess, structurally like 6 things in my head that are harder than just minting. So first, we talk about compliance. Acknowledging that there are use cases for stablecoins out there that are just fully decentralized, right? But here, like for the majority of use cases, especially as we have the tailwind of regulatory compliance, most of the stablecoins that people want to issue need to be compliant because they want to compliantly use it. So compliance is like a big word, many things involved around it. Second thing is actually reserves. I mentioned I just got into the stablecoin world not long ago, and one of the things I was really surprised is how much complexity there is to just like, okay, you have a 1-to-1 backed stablecoin. You would think it's really simple, but it's like not. So you think about the split of the reserve, like how much of it you want to put in treasury, how much you want to just put in like liquid fiat USD at a bank, right? And then when you want to think about the treasury, it's like the relationship you have with these custodians, BlackRock, Fidelity, even like the onchain one, Superstate. You need to talk to them, you need to like get it done, and then you need to open all the accounts. It's actually a lot of work. So related to the reserves, it's the operational complexity that comes with it. So just taking reserve as an example, if you have 1-to-1 backed stablecoin, you have money moving all the time, right? You're on-ramping, you're off-ramping. That means you would have to rebalance your reserve. Like that's a lot to make sure, like every day there's recon going, and then every time you do something, and then you need to make sure the reserve ratio is what your customer asked. And also in terms of like minting and burning, and also in the world of like cross-chain bridging, that is not something simple. And on top of that, it's like one of the reason people wanted to move the money movement on chain is this 24/7 promise. But today we're still kind of held back by the real world bank. So how do you figure out the money movement at scale with 24/7 schedule? It's still a challenge. Okay, next up, we've got the classic, how do you bootstrap your liquidity so that you actually have deep liquidity to swap? I will just not talk length about this. I think a lot of people are talking about it already. And then off-ramping, that is like, how do you build the real world corridors? How do you build different rails so that you can actually move money, not just like within on-chain, between different chains, but in real world where you can actually spend it? Which leads to our next thing about spend. Once you have something like, because stablecoin, at the end of the day, you make money to what? To spend money. So you need a vehicle to spend it. That's the card program or something similar to the card program where you can actually buy something in the real world. Okay, so now I'm gonna just go into a little bit. We talk about the challenges, right? Just talking a little bit of like using some of the on-chain data to see how early. I hesitate to say this. I feel like you're so tired of hearing it, but we really are early in terms of on-chain infrastructure to support all these things that are really hard about a stablecoin. So for example, honing in on reserves. Out of the $315 billion of total supply, there's only 12.1 billion on-chain reserves corresponding. Now, I'm not saying that you have to have on-chain supply, totally not that you have to have the same chain on-chain supply for the reserve, but just like showing you less than 5% of the total supply has corresponding, quote unquote, like transparent reserves that you can see on-chain. So let's just show you how early we are in this minting of stablecoin, making stablecoin success world. Same thing, right? I think particularly me coming from like a Uniswap world, I'm pretty biased. Like I live and breath in the DEX data world, and it was. I always knew that in general, centralized liquidity has deeper liquidity for you to swap. But it was very surprising for me to see that, for example, for USDT, less than like 0.5% of the supply of USDT is actually on-chain in DEXs. Even USDC, I think it's a little better. It's like 1.32%. So DEX is just a sliver of the total supply of these this total stablecoin supply. So when you think about like things you want to do on-chain, right? Like swapping is the backbone of what you can do in DeFi. So we are like super early in terms of the infrastructure. So with all of this together, right, you have a proliferation. You want to crack, okay, how do I make go from like step 1 of minting to step 3 of like, okay, I made it as a stablecoin. I'm observing that the landscape has largely shifted from just thinking about how do I bootstrap my liquidity, so liquidity first, mental model of launching a token, to demand first, mental model of launching. So what's, I guess, harder about this is we already talked about how much harder it is to just launch a stablecoin other than minting, but now you got to not only think about all this stack, right? You need to think about like how do you mint, how do you do reserve, how do you move the money, how do you spend the money, how do you hold the money, like everything around it. On top of that, you're basically being asked to think about your distribution. How do I distribute my tokens to the hands of the holders? So that's like yet a very, very difficult problem. So I would say that like when you think about the stablecoin proliferation market today, it's kind of an old word, but I think it's like very true. You're thinking about like building an ecosystem, and then you really want someone to, or you really want to not try to solve 2 problems at the same time. You don't want to just solve the infrastructure problem. Like I just said, how do you create, how do you move, how do you hold, how do you spend the stablecoin? But you really want to kind of abstract away these complexities and basically get to iterate on your own product, iterate on how do you get that distribution to your users. And not to say that underneath of all these complex functionalities that you need to crack, you have the KYC, KYB, compliance, and like fraud, because you gotta be careful with these stablecoins. Okay, so we talked about a lot of words, looked at a lot of graphs. If we walk away with a few things today, these are the things I would like you to take away. So 1, we already know we live in a proliferation stablecoin market landscape. And then at the same time, it is still incredibly early in terms of the infrastructure stack that can help you build towards stablecoin success. And mostly everybody has realized it's not just like liquidity only or liquidity first. It's about creating the demand so that you set yourself up for success when you launch a token. But at the same time, like because the infrastructure is so early, all these rails on like interoperability between different stablecoin token ecosystem, how do you have a shared liquidity, how do you do on-ramping, off-ramping 24/7, all these problems are still being solved, and then like the playbook of how do you launch like a demand for a successful stablecoin is still being solved. So we at Bridge here is very interested to solve this problem together with everybody. Okay, so that is the end. Thanks to the data partners at Allium, DeFi, Llama, Doom, and RW Assets. Also, the QR code is that if you scan it, and you can learn more about Bridge, and then you can follow Bridge at Stablecoin on Twitter. Yes.
What are the 6 things you said that was harder than minting was the spend and merchant acceptance rates? I'm wondering if you have data on that or looked at those trends.
Unfortunately not. I wish I had a better answer. Next time I will get back to you.
Hi. What will be the key factor for growing demand from Bridge perspective?
I don't know if I can like represent Bridge perspective, but from my own perspective, I think it goes back to like use cases. So why USDC, USDT has like quote unquote cracked it, right? They had huge first mover advantage. So USDT, Tether, basically, there's pent-up demand from trading with like US dollars. So they had like huge flow in China Trader, and then they kind of just like, they knew what the use case is, and they launched it, and then they embraced it, and they like were voila. I mean, they did a lot later, like also with like the exchange integrations, and they like all these corridors, but they basically embraced this use case. And then same thing for USDC. If you look at the the supply growth trajectory in DeFi summer, it really picked up. It's like there was a demand for a US like USD stablecoin to basically on-chain like in DeFi summer to participate in all these like crazy activities. So I think it's just like, okay, when you launch a token, it's not just like, okay, I'm launching a token, but like there needs to be a usage for your token. So I guess things for the bridge issue token, for example, like on Phantom's Cash, like they had a clear use case of like why they wanted to use it, and then so that's why they built all these like campaigns around it. They like did the DEX liquidity, and then they moved on to lending, and then they wanted to like basically do better for their users. So I think the success that we've seen so far is just like crack that use case. And I don't think it's something like people really solved it. So I think we're like actively trying to solve it together with our partners.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, do you see a future for decentralized stablecoins such as Bold?
Great question. One, I think when I think about decentralized stablecoins, I definitely think there's a use case for it, but I don't think I'm like super qualified to answer it because day to day I just working kind of like making compliant stablecoins. But I think there definitely it should exist out there because like we should have a diversity in different kinds of stablecoins. Anyone else? Yes. I guess I'll just give you my.
You mentioned that there was a surprisingly small amount of supply in on-chain reserves, but what does an on-chain reserve actually look like? Because is it just, how does it count as a reserve if the reserve is just also in a stable coin, or is it that the reserve is in a different stable coin than the one that's being issued?
Yes. So on-chain reserves, I'm mostly talking about like the on-chain treasuries, like Superstate. So basically, you tokenize the real-world assets and then you put it on-chain. I think it's really important because it's like you get into the whole like ethos, right? Like you want to make everything on-chain, you want to make it transparent. So when you are trusting these like quarterly reports or like monthly reports again, then we're kind of going backwards in the industry. So I definitely think there's a world where we can have like more on-chain reserves, like treasury reserves, where we can share more transparently. Like people can just check. Basically there is, we say there's like a 1-to-1 reserve. So you can basically see like how much like liquid reserve there is and how much like treasury reserve there is, and without like waiting for that like monthly report to be like, you're fully collateralized. Yeah. Cool. If nothing else, then thank you very much.